Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Paige. I am Paige, your caffeine-imbued host. And here's my caffeine. In the beginning, coffee. And lo, it was very good. Well, today we are continuing our jaunt through the book of Ruth. We're going to go to part 2, where we talk about Ruth and Naomi arriving in Israel, back in Bethlehem. I'm calling this walking the walk. Verse 19, it says, so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. Now, it's one thing to say something. Another thing entirely to do what you say you're going to do. Ruth followed up her words of allegiance with proof of her new allegiance to Naomi and the God of Israel. She went to Bethlehem with Naomi. Now, this brings to mind what James says in chapter 2 of his epistle, where he writes, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm, and be well fed,' but does nothing about their personal needs. What good is that? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accomplished by action, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith, I have deeds.' He said, 'Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds.'" You foolish person. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled. It says Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him for righteousness. And he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. See, Ruth confessed her belief, and then she walked it out. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" She said, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Now, this isn't whining. This is an honest reflection of an honest woman. God in his sovereignty is the one responsible for where Naomi finds herself. No husband or son to care for her. Her situation is bleak. Her response here is what I like to call RLRMTR, or a real-life rubber meets the road response. Yet, she's not paralyzed by the bitterness that she feels. As we will see, she has to find a way to get Ruth settled, and even perhaps find a way to hang on to the property that had been her husband's prior to his leaving Israel. Women couldn't own property at that time, so it was incumbent upon them to solve that puzzle. So, verse 22, Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Now, chapter 2, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Now, in Moab, Ruth had known the hard edge of survival. When the fields were harvested, there was little thought for the poor or the foreigner. The grain went to the landowners, and what was left was claimed quickly by those who worked for them. Charity might be shown on occasion, but it depended entirely on the goodwill of the person, not on any law or expectation. In Moab, the strong kept what was theirs. The weak learned to go without. But in Israel, things were different. Long ago, God had told his people to leave the edges of their fields unharvested and not to gather every last sheaf of grain. Leave it, he said, for the poor, for the orphan, the foreigner. It was a small act of mercy written into the rhythm of their work, a daily reminder that their harvest came from the Lord and that compassion was a part of his law. When Ruth followed Naomi back to Bethlehem, she knew none of this. All she knew was that they were hungry, so when she asked Naomi if she could go into the fields and gather what the harvesters had left behind, she was stepping into a foreign practice, one she could not have found in Moab. No doubt Naomi told her of this custom while they lived together in Moab. They might be poor, but there is no reason to go hungry. Now, although Ruth is a foreigner, and as a young woman alone, she is quite vulnerable in the harvest fields, and she undertakes to provide for her mother-in-law. The law of Moses instructed landowners to leave what the harvesters missed, as I mentioned, so that the poor, the foreigner, and the widow, and the fatherless could glean for their needs. So verse 4 of chapter 2. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the observers, harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled." See, it was customary for the men to cut the grain, and for the female servants to go behind them to bind the grain into sheaves. Then Ruth could glean what they left behind. Now, this phrase where Boaz told her, "I have told the men not to lay a hand on you," indicates the risk that Ruth had taken. She was a foreigner, a foreign woman, not Jewish, which made her vulnerable. It also discloses that Boaz has already taken notice of her. In fact, he had apparently been inquiring about her, as seen when he says, "I've been told about all that you have done." Well, verse 10, at this, she bowed her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before." Verse 12, "May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over, and she got up to glean. Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. She threshed the barley she had gathered, and amounted to about an ephah. That is probably about 30 pounds or about 13 kilograms. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. The fields outside Bethlehem, man, they were golden with harvest. And when Ruth first bent to glean, the sun was hot, her hands were rough, the work was slow. Yet each day she returned to Boaz's fields, trusting that somehow this humble labor would be enough. From morning till evening she gathered what the reapers had left behind, stalk by stalk, handful by handful. By the end of the first day, she'd gleaned an ephah, as we just read, nearly 30 pounds. For the first time in a long time, Naomi had bread again. It was heavy on Ruth's shoulders as she carried it back, but that was the weight of hope. And Ruth kept at it, day after day, week after week, through the barley harvest and into the wheat harvest. 6 weeks of hard, faithful work. 6 weeks of rising early and returning home with grain enough to fill their jars and to keep their table full. When the last sheaf was gathered, Ruth had stored maybe as much as half a ton of grain, enough for her and Naomi for many months to come, not just to eat, but to sell. What began as an act of desperation became a story of God's quiet provision. Through the steady rhythm of Ruth's labor and the kindness of Boaz, I can see the bitterness in Naomi's heart beginning to melt away. God had not abandoned them. He was providing not just with thunder or fire, but through hands that worked and hearts that trusted. Ruth's gleaning reminds us that God's blessings often come one handful at a time. Sometimes a miracle is not in what falls from heaven, but in what we gather faithfully from the field He's placed before us. Personally, I've experienced such provision from God. It was perhaps the darkest time in our family in late 2002. I lost my job, watched my life savings dwindle to nothing in a failed business, and entered into bankruptcy. In many ways, my story mirrors the story of Ruth and Naomi. Doing what I had to do to provide for my family, I'd gone into an industry that I truly did not like, but the paycheck was good. Much like Elimelech moving to Moab. After all, there was food and provision there. You see, that's what a man does. He provides for his family however he has to, however he can. Whatever he has to do, he will provide for his family. When Elimelech died, that provision went away, leaving nothing for Naomi and Ruth. Moab no longer provided for Ruth and Naomi. I totally get that. My Moab, my communications engineer job, no longer provided for me either. I had to reinvent myself. My former career was no longer an option. The only thing I could find that had any possibility of providing income was teaching guitar at a local music store. There was one problem with that. I hadn't played guitar in over 20 years. And I had never been a professional level guitarist. Another story for another time, but to make a long story short, at the age of 47, I scratched and clawed my way into turning myself into a guitarist. I entered the world of being a professional musician, which was a strange world for me, much like Israel and Bethlehem would have been a strange world to Ruth. But today, I'm making a comfortable living teaching music at my church. In Moab, this whole gleaning process was not part of their culture. That would have been something new for Ruth. Gleaning and winnowing barley and wheat is very difficult work. Ruth had to adapt, which she did. I'm sure that in her eyes, what she was doing was surviving, doing what she had to do to provide for her and Naomi. What she did not know was that God was orchestrating all of this in order to bring an anonymous Moabite woman to Israel, where she would become the great-grandmother to David. See, no Ruth, no David. No David, no Jesus. I can't help but wonder as I look at my life if this new chapter, my becoming a guitar teacher, is about more than merely providing a living for my wife and me, much like Ruth's new gleaning career was about more than gathering grain. That's a good place to stop. I'm Paige. Here's my caffeine. I am out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye. If you go to my Patreon site, you'll see the link here in a minute, you can order the transcripts for these podcasts. Now, these podcast transcripts contain more than just what I'm saying in the podcast. There's other details that show up. The big thing is the study questions I have at the end of each episode. For instance, in this episode, Walking the Walk, questions like, what does Ruth's journey from Moab to Bethlehem reveal about the difference between words of faith and actions of faith? What examples in your own life illustrate the principle that faith must be expressed through action? Why is it significant that Ruth not only pledged loyalty, but actually followed through? What does Naomi's request to be called Mara, or bitter, tell us about her view of God's sovereignty in her suffering? Do you think Naomi's bitterness was sinful, honest, or both? What ways does Naomi still demonstrate faith, even in the midst of expressing pain and disappointment? Have you ever, like Naomi, felt like God has turned his hand against you? What did you learn about his faithfulness through that season? Questions like that. So please go to Patreon, Coffee Bible page at patreon.com, and become a supporter. And you can get access to all of this information, plus anything else I may be doing. Any book I write, any of my written materials can be yours. If you don't become a member, you just want to stay free, which you can, then you can just pay a few dollars for each one of these transcripts as you want them. You don't have to pay a monthly fee to get access to all of them. All right, that's another good place to stop. Here's my coffee again. Have a great and glorious day. Bye-bye. You can purchase these transcripts at patreon.com/coffeebible page.